walking up here, there was a question that was asked about Collier and what happens to him after the construction of Fort Collier. So he actually spends a lot of his time, what he's most known for during the war is serving as an ordnance officer at the depot in Augusta, Georgia. But he has a really fascinating story. After the war, he moves to the Bronx. So he gets out of the South, he moves to the Bronx, becomes a well-known maritime painter. So like you could look at auction sites online and find paintings of ships and seascapes painted by him, and they're actually pretty valuable. He also becomes one of the leading figures in the establishment of United Confederate Veterans camps in New York City after the war. And so traditionally, like we think of UCV organizations only in the South, there are, there's a book called Confederate Carpetbaggers, actually talks about this. Confederate veterans going north after the war and creating, not only businesses and trying to make a new life, but also to organize veterans groups as well. So as I said on the other side, so we're actually inside of the fort. We're in what's called the terraplene of the fort right now. So as I said, on the outside, this is a tourist attraction. So you have to think about, what Winchester is like. I mean, today there's a lot of businesses and things and shops and all kind of attractions. Winchester's kind of a boring place in 1860 when it's very much like the town where I grew up in Pennsylvania, Frackville. Not a lot to do. And so when something exciting is happening in your town, you're gonna go check it out because you're bored. And so it was not unusual for civilians to come out here while the laborers are working on building this fort and to talk with them and to, jot down descriptions of what this is like. I mean, today, this would not be allowed at a military installation because you have no idea who these people are. It actually turns out that one of the individuals who was coming out here to visit Fort Collier was Hattie Griffith. And on the sign that is right there, there's an image of Hattie Griffith. Hattie Griffith was a Quaker and a Unionist sympathizer. So had Confederate officials known that Hattie Griffith was a Unionist, probably wouldn't have allowed her to tour a Confederate fort that's under construction because you don't know what she's going to do with that sort of information. She's not coming out here as a spy. She is coming out here as a curious human being in a city that she finds boring. And so this is what she wrote about her visit to Fort Collier. She writes in her diary, August 21st, 1861. I have this day visited the breastworks or fortifications out on the Martinsburg Pike. Was exceedingly interested. First work of the kind I had ever seen. The first time I was ever so near a cannon. I looked into them. The cannonballs weigh 32 pounds each. There were 4 cannons planted and much ammunition there. A great many men were working, and I saw the powder magazines. This fortification and its artillery seemed to me so secure. I have read of them, but I've never seen them. This always makes me chuckle, because I thought, who is reading books pre-1861 about field fortifications? Apparently Hattie Griffith. They had several masked batteries. It seems real strong and well built. There's a high embankment of sandbags, barrels, and brush covered over with dirt, part sodded over. They intend to sod it with a big ditch on the lower side. They have completely surrounded Stein's house, which is now occupied by soldiers, some of whom were working, some cooking, some washing, some on guard, and some lounging, and some sleeping. Hattie Griffith's account is, to me, probably the best description we have of what Fort Collier is like in that first month of its construction. There are some Confederate soldiers, militia, who are writing about it, but nothing with that level of detail. So when the fort is being built, eventually there are going to be 10 pieces of heavy artillery placed here. So based on the sketches we have, based on the accounts we have from soldiers who worked on the construction of this fort, this is the type of gun that would have dominated the ground here at Fort Collier in 1861. More than likely, these are coming from Harper's Ferry. So this is a model 1829 32-pound cannon. So the shell it shoots are 30 pounds. Hattie Griffith writes about this. A full service charge on this gun is 8 pounds of black powder. If that barrel is just straight, it can shoot an accurate distance of 800 yards. And obviously if you elevate, you can get a little bit more out of it. One of those guns was placed right here. So you can kind of see this depression in the earthworks. We have a sketch of the fort. Let's see if I can get it here quickly. This was drawn by a Confederate soldier from Georgia later in 1861. So this kind of shows the outline of the fort, the location of those guns, and one of those guns is placed here. Now, those guns do not stay long in Fort Collier. When Stonewall Jackson comes to Winchester in November of 1861, he is going to rearrange things a little bit. And certainly, as you get into those early months of 1862, Jackson knows that there is a much larger force, about 32,000 men, commanded by Nathaniel P. Banks, moving from Harper's Ferry toward Winchester, and ultimately they will come and occupy the city on March the 12th. This is a sketch of Banks's army entering Winchester. This right here is the Martinsburg Pike, Route 11, and that is Fort Collier in that sketch. So as Jackson starts to get nervous, he ends up moving those guns out. When those guns are moved out, a lot of the physical work of taking these apart, transporting them, and getting them south of Winchester is done by enslaved people. We know the names of two of these individuals, Henry Dilworth and Dennis Taylor. Both of these men were enslaved by a member of the Washington family who lived about 5 miles north of here. How do we know this? Here's how. In February of 1862, Dennis Taylor and Henry Dilworth escaped. They said, we're out of here. They went to Harper's Ferry, and if you were a black person who arrived at Harper's Ferry seeking freedom, the first thing that happened was clerks in the provost marshal's office, they sat down with you and they interviewed you. And they took down a statement about who you are, who enslaved you, where you're coming from, why you're coming, and any other important information that you can provide. Both Dilworth and Taylor provided really detailed information about this fortification. So General Banks knows that when he enters Winchester, he is expecting to see this. He also knows from what these guys are telling him that all the heavy artillery that was put here in 1861, by early 1862, is now out. And so these guys play a crucial role in intelligence gathering for Banks as he's preparing to come in and occupy this city, the first of many Union occupations. Now, at the end of Hattie Griffith's diary, recording her visit here to Fort Collier, she wrote something that to me is very, very powerful. And we're going to kind of wrap up the tour this morning with this statement. So at the end of that diary entry, she wrote, "Surely it is something to be remembered, but I hope that it will never be used. Sometimes I think that when people come to historic sites like Fort Collier, they seem to forget what these things are built for. They're not building this as a tourist attraction. It is an attraction today. It is certainly something to see, and I'm glad that you're all here. But this is a tool of war. War means death, war means destruction, war means tragedy for families. And so you can almost see this moment when she's writing in her diary where she's like, wow, how cool is this? These are all the wonderful things I'm seeing. And then she pauses and she's processing, this is meant for war. There are going to be soldiers in here. There are going to be soldiers attacking it. I hope it will never be used. At various points after it was built, Fort Collier was used, but not in the way that Hattie Griffith feared. So you can imagine at various points during the conflict that you are going to have this fort here is vacant. Both Union and Confederate soldiers are going to use this fort throughout the course of the conflict. There are going to be encampments here. It's here. Why not use it? But the first time that this fort is actually used for defensive purposes is July 20th, 1864. So July 20th, 1864, there was a small engagement just north of Winchester. So if you know where Chick-fil-A and Red Robin and Lowe's and Target and Monkey Joe's and all that stuff is north of Winchester, there was a battle fought there on July 20th, the Battle of Rutherford's Farm. It was a rare Union victory. A Union force commanded by General William Averell going up against a Confederate division commanded by General Stephen Dodson Ramseur. Averell drove Ramseur off the field that afternoon. Ramseur's men, as they were retreating from the battlefield to Winchester, they made this their first and main defensive line. So they are inside of here. Averell advances to a point where he can see Fort Collier. And he looks at Ramseur's division, he sees the strength of this position, and he says, nope, I'm not going to do it. Because if I do it, I might run the risk of losing everything that I have gained. But the sort of crowning moment for this fortification, the moment that Hattie Griffith hoped would never ever come, comes 161 years ago yesterday. And that is the Third Battle of Winchester. During the final phases of that battle, as Union forces are pushing the Confederates from the north and from the east, the Confederate line contracts, takes the shape of an inverted L. There are Confederates inside of Fort Collier, Confederates outside of this earthwork fortification. In front of us, on this open plain, would have been 6,000 Union cavalry, ordered by General Philip Sheridan to do something that had never before been done during the conflict. An all-out cavalry charge against a fixed position of infantry. I try to imagine what that moment would have been like. 6,000 horses, and you're talking about well over a mile in length. This is just a part of the attack. The sound and the thunder of 24,000 hooves hitting the ground, coming toward this. Confederates who are inside here psychologically are saying, oh my God, it's cool and frightening all at the same time. It's kind of like Pickett's charge. Union soldiers saying, wow, I'm scared, but wow, this is pretty cool. I've never seen this before. Ultimately, the charge that hits here and hits along other parts of the Confederate line breaks the Confederate defenses of Winchester and marks the first of a string of Union victories by Phil Sheridan's Army of the Shenandoah. What is amazing to me is that after the war was over, when the Stein family returned and they saw their farm had been decimated, their home had been destroyed, they not only rebuilt it, but they recognized the historic value of the property. War is a traumatic thing. I would have totally understood if the Stein family would have just leveled the earthworks. Not a happy time in their lives, but they kept them. And not only kept them and maintained them, they welcomed for generations people to this property to talk about their story and the historic significance of this site to the valley, to the Civil War, and to American history. And so I know there are descendants of the Stein family here with us this morning, and I want to just extend a thanks to them and to their ancestors for preserving this site. We have inside of the relic room a sign that was discovered, it probably dates to like the early 1900s, where they basically hung it out along the road here saying, Fort Collier, come, tourists welcome, come and visit. So they always were open and welcome to people coming and visiting this site. There's a whole bunch of artifacts that family found over the course of the years, and they would freely and openly share them with visitors. And so some of those artifacts are on display inside of the house, and I encourage you all to go visit them. So I'll take any final questions that you might have. And if there are no questions, yes, sir. Where's the result?
Do they know what the main crop was that they were using here?
Yeah, so predominantly wheat, which is a staple crop in the valley. I mean, most farmers in the valley during the war are growing wheat, but this is wheat.
Is that why the train would have stopped here? Is this the main depot for all?
So the main depot is actually just north of here at Stevenson's Depot. There were plans to extend that line through Winchester, but the war interrupted that.
So softball question.
Yeah.
Were there any famous individuals that were involved in that Third Battle of Winchester and the cavalry charge? And then how does that cavalry charge back at that time compare to other charges during the Civil War, other wars, etc.?
Yeah, so yes, there is someone famous, Phil. George Armstrong Custer, right? You have all heard of George Armstrong Custer. Custer commanded a brigade at the Third Battle of Winchester, Brigade of Cavalry. His command is actually just on the other side of the Martinsburg Pike, so on the west side of the road. But what's interesting, if you have a moment, if you look at the sign that's there, there's a painting that was done in the 1880s by the artist Third Battle, and it was part of a series of 24 paintings that Louis Prang and Company published depicting different significant scenes from the Civil War. And Tholstrup decided to recreate the Union cavalry attack at Fort Collier. So during the battle, the cavalry that attacks right here is commanded by Colonel Charles Russell Lowell. If you look at that painting, George Custer appears in the painting. Custer is not here, he's over there. But Custer's super popular, right? For what he does after the conflict, obviously the tragedy at Little Bighorn in '76. But if you want to sell paintings, no one knows who Charles Russell Lowell is. Everyone knows who George Custer is, so you've got to put him on there with his red handkerchief and all those types of things. What was the other part of your question?
Sure, how does this cavalry charge compare to others during the Civil War, other wars?
Yeah, so this is unprecedented. So the cavalry assault that happens here at 3rd Winchester, it is the largest cavalry assault against fixed infantry position during the war and in all of military history in North America. So what happens here doesn't happen before or really after. It's truly a remarkable moment. And it's one of those things, not to get into too much of a tangent and maybe a little bit of self-promotion, but you started it. So I have a biography coming out about Phil Sheridan. It's supposed to be released September 30th. Rutledge Publishing is publishing it. It's called General Philip Sheridan, Life, War, and Memory. And one of the things that I write about in the book is how Sheridan was really an innovator when it came to cavalry, because cavalry traditionally up to this point in the war was largely reconnaissance, escorting supply wagons. And Sheridan's like, we have this massive piece of horse flesh, a trained soldier on that massive beast. Let's use that as an offensive weapon. And he was always looking for the most opportune moment. And the first time it really presented itself was here at 3rd Winchester. Any other questions? All right, well, I want to thank you all for coming this morning. I appreciate it. I said the tour will be over at 10:30. It's 10:31. So that's pretty good.
That's good. Yeah.
All right. There are other things. Rob, do you want to say stuff about?
Sure, there are refreshments in the house, coffee, there's some bathrooms. Of course, our living history, right up way there. And at 11 o'clock,
I'm not.
Bill Zuckerman is going to be performing with some other artists. The house will be open, but when Phil starts to play, you know, you're going to want to see it, and it'll be right on the front patio. Okay. Again, thanks everybody for coming in. Thank you, Jonathan.
And also, real quick, if you're one of my students, just stick around, so you can just stay here. I'll tell you what.